Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you this morning. As I've been listening and kind of watching the students and just listening to people yesterday, I'm very much aware that actually I don't really need to be here. You know an awful lot of this stuff yourselves. So I suppose what I'm really going to kind of talk about are sort of three different things. One of the things is kind of what is a healthy Ireland? What is a healthy environment? What are healthy places and healthy people? And I'm going to talk a little bit then about kind of like the evidence, not just the work that we've done, but sort of the broader world of research that's going on. And then I'm going to kind of take you on to some of the perceptions of the people who make decisions about the kind of outdoor spaces that we have available to us. And then I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about kind of how the new project that I'm working on fits into all of that. So that's a whistle-stop tour of what I'm going to be doing. I suppose the very first question is, how are health and environment related? And if you just kind of sit back and think about it for a minute and think about what Tomás just said about two very different agencies in terms of the HSC and the EPA coming together to co-fund research in this area, it actually makes perfect sense, because the environment is the place that gives us clean air, fresh water, food, places of shelter, places to play in, places to exercise in. The environment is where we work and where we live and where we play. Sometimes we have kind of barriers and separations between that, but kind of think about it like that. The environment is what supports us to do the things that we need to do. So in terms of kind of healthy places then, I suppose one of the questions that immediately comes to mind is sort of like, well, if that's what a healthy environment is, then isn't a healthy place simply the places where we live and where we work and where we rest? So there's one word that I've heard Tomás mention quite a few times, and I'm just going to pause for a minute to see if any of you can come up with it before we move on. One word to think about, what do healthy places enable or empower us to do? If I kind of do this, grow and to flourish. So that's, I suppose, the key part of what's underpinning all of this. And if we think about then these kind of healthy places, we very much divide them from a mapping and almost like a planning perspective into kind of funny colours. We talk about green spaces and blue spaces, and really if you kind of think about what's outside there, it's multicoloured. And it's not just green or blue, and it's very hard to do these arbitrary divisions, but let's go along with it. Humour me for a second. So there are woodlands and forests. There are gardens, there are parks, they're farmland, aren't they? Also roadside verges. So these are health-enabling green places, or should be. Blue spaces then, on the other hand, are canals. They're also rivers, they're also lakes, and they're also seas. That's, this is not new. This is just kind of looking at the world in terms of how we relate to it, how we connect with it. And then if you kind of go on and think, well, if these are blue and green spaces, health-enabling places, what's the evidence? Now, if I was to start talking about all the research that had been done, you wouldn't be getting out of here at 4:30, and you wouldn't have all the fun in terms of the workshops. So I'm just going to give you a few little snapshots of where the research is kind of really interesting. And let's just take woodlands. And there are a couple of different things there that I want you to sort of focus on. The very, very first thing is, when we investigate increases in tree cover and in planting and in vegetation, we see straight away direct health and societal benefits in terms of better birth outcomes. It is also really, really interesting that when you look at the removal of biodiversity, when you look at a situation where in America between, I think it was 1990 and 2007, or 1994 and 2007, they had to remove almost 10 million ash trees because of a little tiny invasive green beetle. It's a really pretty beetle, but they did an awful lot of damage because they would burrow in and eat out just inside kind of like the tree bark. So basically the trees weren't able to kind of keep living. From a health point of view, there were one of two things that about 15 states could do. One was fell them, and then the others looked at inoculation. Most of them went down the felling route. Within a very, very short period of time, 15 states, 10 million trees removed, and what they saw straight away was a spike in terms of respiratory disease. 6,000 deaths were linked to it, and 15,000 cardiovascular deaths. So the two things there are increase in biodiversity, increase in woodlands, health benefits, decrease negative connections to our health. Also kind of things like sort of how people kind of feel connected to particularly old woodlands and grounding people, giving them a sense of place. Then let's move away from woodlands and let's look at kind of wet blue spaces. And the research is mainly focused on the coast here, but what's really, really interesting is that not only does living near the coast, growing up alongside the coast, but also moving to the coast has been associated with being healthier, being more active. And what's really, really important there is that was irregardless of wealth. So in a way, the opportunity to grow up and live beside the sea or in close proximity to the sea was a social equalizer. So from a social justice point of view, that's really, really important. There has also been some work done in places like Germany where they looked at kind of mental health and well-being within cities, and they found that in terms of mental health and well-being, and in particular kind of responses to depression, that people who felt closely linked to blue spaces were better able to look after themselves. And very, very interestingly, people were given a picture of a garden. It was a very manicured garden, I will be honest with you about that, a sea view and an arable field. And they were also given the prices for each of the three rooms. The room with the sea view was, not surprisingly, the most expensive. Even knowing the price, people still went for it. Way, way above the other two. You could have maybe given them a range of different kind of green space views, but they didn't. They were the ones that they got. And they would still, all the time, go for the sea view. And I see some people nodding their heads. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I suppose, again, let's look at kind of what does the evidence tell us about how nature contact and nature engagement benefits health and well-being. And first off is actually just the presence of green spaces gives us a buffer or shelters us a little bit from kind of like the impacts of the sort of day-to-day stresses of modern life. That's first off. Then even kind of going and looking more at where people were, oops, there goes the poster. When people were walking, they found that obviously people are moving, and that has very tight connections to then increased mental health and well-being. But the key thing here was that there were better outcomes for health when people were walking in more natural environments than in more residential or more urban or more built environments. They also found that there's a time factor, like the more people spent outdoors or in these kind of natural spaces, the less they were at risk from suffering with things like depression and stress, the better able they were to manage. And a very interesting thing, going back to that increase in biodiversity as well, in the school in Austria, they looked at kind of where they actually increased planting in the grounds, and the teenagers reported to themselves being happier and being more kind of balanced and more well adjusted. What about physical health? And again, the same sorts of things start to appear in terms of the research. If you look at increased physical activity, if you look at reductions in type 2 diabetes, reductions in cardiovascular disease, reductions in blood pressure, it's all linked to people being active or just spending time, even very, very moderate levels of activity. You're not kind of making people run for 5 hours at high speed, because for most of us we can't do that. So even just kind of spending time doing light levels of activity, particularly as people age, like for example gardening, they showed that that had direct health benefits for people. Obesity and low blood pressure were obviously also big things that we'll come on to. So then the question is, well, why are we still doing research on this? Why is there a question? And the reason for that is that the studies are really, really interesting and very, very useful, but we still don't understand the mechanisms exactly. Like when you have very similar studies and they show slightly different things or mixed results, why is that? So more work needs to be done. But also, if you're trying to change government policy and practice, you are straight away kind of looking at then what do the other medical studies say? And they're looking at very, very robust, very, very randomized trials, massive of kind of population size, masses of research going into randomized trials. And the science of looking at health benefits from nature is only starting to get towards there in terms of being robust. So that's why we're kind of still trying to answer questions. A question for you. Do we need to find special places? You know, if you think about Ireland from like kind of the Giant's Causeway down to Our Lady's Island in Wexford, if you went from Gleninchiquin down the road a wee bit in Kerry right up to Bloody Foreland in Donegal, there are beautiful places right around Ireland. Do we need to go to them to find nature or to kind of keep ourselves healthy and well? No, I'm hearing no. And we do. These places are beautiful. They're amazing to go to, and there could be cultural as well as health benefits and reasons why we might want to go to them. But we don't need to go to them because there's nature all around us. There's nature on our doorsteps. As soon as we start looking around, we find signs of nature. So I suppose one of the other things then is kind of just thinking about sort of what is nearby nature. Well, nature changes throughout the seasons. Like for example, in winter, a couple of us were running all around parts of northwest Galway where I live, looking at waxwings feeding just outside the school up the road from me. But for most of the year, I see robins in my garden. I may also at the bird feeder see Renata rat because she has learned that she can hop up onto the top of the bird feeder and get food there quite easily. I might not like seeing her as much as I like seeing the otter in the river, but at the same time, aren't rats part of nature as well? And then kind of thinking about, you know, gardening and wildlife and flowers, we kind of look forward to spring so much. Any of you who have gardens, like you'll know that you're kind of looking for the first sort of buds, and one of the first flowers to come out are dandelions. And straight away in my head comes, I have to do something about the dandelions. And now I'm kind of learning to sort of live with the dandelions a little bit because they are amazing as pollinators and they're a splash of colour and it's just amazing to see them. So then thinking about going back to the evidence again, what does nearby nature tell us? And think about it now from that kind of lifespan, from the moment that we are born and as we go through life and move towards the end of our lives. There are so many kind of positive outcomes. And again, I'm just kind of touching on a couple of those, like better starts in life, increased attention, increased cognition, increased ability to manage, to be resilient, to be socially cohesive, to be helpful, to be kind. All of this is seen as well as things like reductions in allergies and, you know, kind of being able to sort of be physically healthier as well. What are the influential factors that are driving that? Well, they are those sorts of things that I talked about right at the beginning. The proximity of spaces to have on your doorstep. How quickly can you get to a place where you can look at nature? How much time can you spend in nature? How big is that space that's available to you? Have you got time in it to get lost and to have that chance to explore and just kind of really investigate and find out what's going on in an area? Some of the other questions, very interesting as well, is that kind of like if parents feel safe in an area, the children are more likely to feel safe. If parents are active in the area, right through to kind of being physically active, the children are going to be more active as well. If parents feel safe in an area, the children will feel safe as well. So safety is one of those kind of issues that we have to kind of think about. How do you make spaces accessible for people and still look after nature as well? So just thinking about it from an Irish kind of context, again, like we are a very small island, but our population equally isn't huge. Like you're talking about just about 4.7 million last year, the last census. But if you look at the map, the kind of the hot spots of where our population are, we are an increasingly urbanised population. And you can see that the pressure points are towards the east. There are issues with rural depopulation in parts of Donegal. But no matter where it is, right around the coast, most of the population live within 10 kilometres of the coast. So again, you can start to see then pressure points and also opportunities in terms of what I talked about with that kind of balance from being close to the sea. Having said all of that, in 2015, Healthy Ireland undertook the first national survey of populations, and they found that 13% of respondents said that there was a problem with available, accessible open space. So for a country that's got that much amount of green space and such a low population, that's actually quite a shocking statistic. So one of those things then is sort of thinking about the social aspect of all of this. If you have people very, very urbanised, but also kind of rural depopulation, we've got problems with isolation. So how we use space moves and changes as we move throughout our lifespan. The places where we played as kids aren't also the places that we go to as young people, or the place that we bring our dogs for a walk, or the places that we go to where we're elderly. So who makes those spaces available to us? Well, I'm going to introduce you to my cartoon characters. So the lovely people up here with the blue stars are health promotion officers. The people down here in the blue diamonds are engineers. These are local authority people who work to do in environment and biodiversity. These are the planners, and these are conservationists. They are all people who some way, shape or form influence green space use or green space management. The key decision makers there, I will say, are engineers and then planners. So we talked to them, we got their views about nature, and then we asked them kind of, where do they agree, where do they disagree? And I'm going to show you just a snapshot of where they agreed and disagreed. So the very first thing is you can see straight away that they all, regardless of their role, said that they recognised a personal meaning to their health and well-being from nature. That's important because they saw it both in terms of mental health and they also saw it in terms of their physical health. They also said that being out in nature motivated them to walk more, so they felt fitter. So there's that motivational aspect of it and health promoting aspect of being out in nature. And when they were able to do that, they were also minded to invest more in looking after nature and conserving it. So that's that kind of development of pro-environmental behaviours. But what did they disagree on? And it's really interesting. It comes down to kind of like the types of spaces. So for example, you can see here that engineers wanted big green open areas where people could play sports. The others weren't so much concerned with that. At the same time, both engineers and planners thought that when you were looking at providing spaces for family and young children, playgrounds were more important. Nobody kind of thought, well, could we put playgrounds and places, wild places together? And then if you thought about, well, what does their ideal kind of space look like? You'll see that engineers have a very, very designed view of the world around us. Very, very neat and very, very tidy. And nobody else really had that same sort of view. So then we started to ask why. Even if you said these people started out saying health benefits there, that they recognise themselves from nature. Engineers don't know that everybody else thinks nature is important. For the people that we talked to, which I have to say, it was a pilot study and we talked about 53 people in total. There was about 42, 43 involved at this level of scoring. So what does that tell us? If you have a new kind of green space that you are going to design, you can't just have one stakeholder group designing it for you. You need to bring everybody together, and in particular you need to involve the local community to find out what they want. So that is sort of where we're going in terms of the Near Health project. We are asking people what is it that they want, and using that to kind of try and work out what is that kind of health-environment relationship at a meaningful level for an individual, for a community. And we are going to do that in 3 different ways, and I'm just going to very briefly talk about those now. So the first thing is the team isn't just me. I'm only one part of a great group of people. We're made up of 3 researchers, myself, Geisha and Iski, and we're environmental and social scientists. Behind us, we have social and marketing innovators. We also have health promotion people and medical people, and we have ecologists, and they're a great team to work with. So the sorts of questions that we're asking is kind of what are the bridges and the barriers that connect people to nature? And using that by talking to people across a whole varieties of life and more wider than kind of the decision makers. We are also asking communities, what do they want, especially in terms of their future ideal space, if there was like the chance to make a difference tomorrow? For 50 years' time, what would we start doing tomorrow? And then the final question is kind of thinking, so that's about future places. What can we do for future people, for happy, healthy people? What can they do to kind of live a fulfilled life? So our questions are about kind of things that people can do at an individual or at a household or at a community level, at a variety of different kind of levels and scales. And some of those things might be just, going for a walk outside or dancing outside as opposed to in a hall. It might also be for some people that they get involved and make insect hotels or do habitat management. For other people it might be that they cycle a little bit more, or they walk more than they do, or that they go out and start learning how to kayak, for example. So I'm going to leave you with this final question. And the final question is, can we make the places around us into healthy spaces where we can just very simply notice nature, feel joy and flourish? Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to ask me questions now.
Loads of questions. Thank you very much, Caitriona. Can we throw it open to the floor, and maybe just for the benefit of our online viewers, maybe if somebody asks you a question, if you wouldn't mind sort of paraphrasing it or repeating it before you answer it, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I would love to hear your thoughts on how accessibility and people with disabilities fit into the planning, because I can appreciate that there's lots of tension between making the outdoors accessible while also maintaining the pristine nature. So I just kind of love to hear your thoughts on that aspect.
So what we've done is we're talking to people who are already sort of working at interacting with the environment, but also living with disabilities. And I suppose one of the things is just to kind of say, what makes it easier for you? And again, the other question is that sort of thing about sort of how do you make pristine spaces accessible for people? And I suppose the very first thing that I have to kind of start off and say, I don't think we have pristine spaces in Ireland. I don't even know if we have pristine spaces in the world, because there are very, very few places in Ireland that haven't been hugely already managed and modified by human society over generations. So I think it's about how you just make that more managed. So it might be that there are places that you kind of say, what would you like to experience? Is it a woodland? Where are the woodland areas? And you sort of look at how people can use places, and I think that then is much more inclusive, and it also kind of says there may be places that are very, very sensitive, even though they could still be modified. And you might say, how can we make those places available? And the way that they're available might be different to like some of the woodlands that I'm thinking of in County Galway, that they're relatively flat. But one of the things that like from talking to people, they sort of said straight off, kind of things like tree roots, and sometimes occasionally like the gravel will get worn off paths, so you have like a kind of like a rock that sticks out. So it's just kind of thinking about places like that, and how do you, so you might actually make the path wider over at the other side, and you might also kind of walk people through the area and kind of say, here are, like, tell us what the barriers are for you, so we can kind of flag these with the people who are going to hopefully do more of this in their own area. Because that's the thing, like, it would be good that communities would own it and kind of think about who are the people who are using it. And there are some really good examples of that sort of already around the country. So it'd be just kind of trying to sort of say to people, here's a good example of how they're doing it, for example, down in Cork. Here's a good example of where they're doing it up in Donegal. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, please, Sophie.
Thanks, Caitriona. I'm just wondering, in terms of trying to increase participation and interaction with nature, is it, focusing on the resource and managing it, or is it focusing on the people and like changing people's minds? And I mean, it's the conversion in this room, like we all engage with nature, but all the people who don't, is it because of the resource, or is it because of them and the way that they think?
I think it's a little bit of both. So Sophie's question is about kind of is more work needed to work on kind of managing the resource and making the resource more available, or on looking at the people who access that resource and working with them. And I think you can't separate the two. I think you need to have both, because there are, like, just off the top of my head, one of the examples I was talking to Brendan Flynn, I think was the planner down in County Cork, who would have been one of the first people to set up like a walking route, and he said that people kind of came out with woodwork, that it was almost like there had been a voice that was never spoken and was never kind of listened to, that suddenly all these people went, there's a fantastic place to go for a walk. And if you are going up in a place where you don't have access to those places, how do you know you need it? So it's about kind of working with all sectors of community right across, I mean, not just even in Ireland, like right across the world, because I think that's the thing that I'm an ecologist, but I was brought up by people who like felt very, very strongly about kind of social justice, and I think that's nature shouldn't be just for people who have the money to afford it. Nature should be part of everybody's everyday life, and part of this project has been mind-blowing in terms of kind of seeing how connected people are right across, like from the poorest sectors of society to like the very, very wealthy. But just kind of thinking about how are those voices heard and owned in terms of making decisions, and kind of starting to sort of think about, the things that I take for granted. Like if I look outside at the shelters there and I kind of think, I have a home, I have a beautiful home. I live in County Galway. I don't hear traffic, I hear birds. And occasionally the wasp nest that lived up above my bathroom for about a year and a half. And occasionally I hear bats inside as well. But talking to people who have no shelter, and to kind of think about how connected they are to the world around them and to nature, how actually walking alongside a river for some of them was what kept them alive in the last 6 months. That to me says nature is really, really important for everybody.
My name is Maura Leary. I'm a HSC Health Promotion Officer, and I work with health promoting schools. And I suppose we did 4 workshops with schools over the past month, and they were all around mental health. And the one thing that was coming up through all of them was the level of anxiety among young children, and the increasing level of anxiety among young children. And you mentioned some study there about was it an Austrian school?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what kind of stuff did they do?
It was actually really, really simple. They just planted up parts of the school. So they looked at the students, and it was secondary school, So Maura's question was kind of looking at kind of mental health and young people and kind of increasing levels of anxiety. And we can see this in the studies, not just here in Ireland, but again right across from America, Australia, Canada, Finland, other parts of Europe, the UK, and in particular in Scotland. And it was very, very interesting how for those schools, what they did was they actually just planted up the grounds. And just that increasing level of green space, I think it goes back to the buffer, that we actually don't even know that it's doing that kind of sort of sheltered function for us because we take it so much for granted. And it was that they noticed that over time there was just greater levels of calmness, but also greater levels of social interaction between the students. And I think that's one of the things that if you are somebody who goes out and talks to schools, you know that one of the first things that people say is, I know the kids who walk to school every day. I know the kids who run around outside, not just when they're in school. And I know the kids who are sitting at a screen for a large part of their away from school time. Because you can tell in terms of how they interact with others and how they behave. Because although we are very, very sedentary compared to what we were like kind of 40 years ago, 80 years ago, we are still physical, slightly cultured animals. We need to move and we need to have that kind of motion. And I think that's the thing, that kind of being able to do that in a greener space. And actually, even there were other studies in Spain, definitely, where even just actually a view from the school window onto this kind of green space resulted in better levels of interaction and attentiveness and cognition in the Spanish schools. Not increased levels of cognition in the Austrian schools, which is interesting, but I kind of think that it was hugely important in terms of them demonstrating the mental health benefits.
Caitriona, can I just add to that? We were discussing yesterday work that's been undertaken at Linköping University in Sweden. We had Anders Savansky over from there a few months ago, and he was talking about the neuroscience. So, for any of us who are worried about the woolly, soft social science and how do you feel about it, they were looking at the neuroscience, and they were looking at interdisciplinary research between outdoor practitioners, medical practitioners, and social scientists. And so they were literally measuring serotonin in people's brains based on having a view, having an access to green space and engaging with green space. And I think the Guardian newspaper in recent days has published a more accessible version of some of that research.
Yeah, and there's also been studies where they looked at cortisol levels. So again, another because a lot of the research is self-reported, which is brilliant to have. But of course, when you go to kind of compare against the drug trials, they're kind of saying, well, how robust is that? So actually being able to kind of measure chemicals like serotonin and cortisol is really hugely important. And they were able to show, like, even just actually something like gardening reduced people's stress levels. And I think it is, again, just that sort of physical activity of engaging with the ground and the earth and then the smells and watching things around you.
Please.
Yeah, my name's Lily Gould, and can I just say, as a resource for communities and councils and the broad range of people, the All-Ireland National Pollinator Plan is a really good resource, and it's online from Biodiversity Ireland, just to let people know to access that. And they've really good booklets and leaflets for schools, communities, gardens, and their businesses, planners,
Yeah.
the wide range of people.
So Niamh was just talking there now about the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, which has been devised by a number of people working with the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Ireland, and it's a north-south plan, but they've tailored it for things like businesses and for families and for schools as well. And the actions are very simple, they're very, very easy to do. We're trying to persuade NUID to sign up to it as an All-Ireland Pollinator Campus as well. Trinity are already there, and several other, I think Maynooth might be there as well. It's something everybody could do, and then you can kind of report back on, what kind of extra pollinator activity you see in your garden.
Great. Okay. Caitriona, thank you very much.